let's try and have a bit of a discussion about what the company is and how it differs from other ways of doing business. Now, imagine this. Let's say that we've got two good friends. Let's call them Yorgos and George. They're both inventors, and they come up with an innovative toilet flush that uses less water than usual. As you can see, I've thought this through really carefully. Yeah? So it is environmentally friendly. So Yorgos and George, they've made their prototype flush. They tested it. It flushes. They think kind of it fits in with all these ideas about being environmentally sustainable. They think there might be a market for this. They're trying to lobby Greta to go to the UN and talk about toilets and flushes and things. So they think they're going to do great. They've hooked up with a manufacturer who can produce those toilet flushes, and they're thinking about bringing this to market. So they're super excited about this. Now, can they just do this? You don't need a particular license to engage in business with something. This is not something that people are going to eat. This isn't something that has industrial application. So far as I can tell, it isn't something that requires permission for you to be able to sell to people. Food stuff might be a little bit weird because then you need to be careful. But if it's like just a candle, a lot of people make candles. Anybody here makes candles? For fun? It's a hobby, apparently, for people with no friends. Right. So I could sell them. I can have I could walk around with the thing in front of the university and say, who would like to buy my nice candles? Or I can, in the front of my house, I can try and sell them. Now, whether this requires permission from the council to put a stall in front of your house, I'm not sure, okay? But you could sell them on eBay. There's nothing preventing you from listing something on eBay for sale. It could be anything. You can just do this. You don't need licenses from the government. You don't need permissions. You don't need to adopt a particular type of business organization that is preset and has a particular recognition in the law. You can just do it. So our friends here, Yorgos and George, could very simply list their toilet flushes on eBay, or they can list them on Amazon Marketplace or on Gumtree or something, right? Any of these platforms that you've got that you can advertise your stuff online and allow the facility for people to pay, and then you just send it to them. This is great. What happens is they're doing this in their own personal capacity. We could argue that they're doing this as sole traders. Who's a sole trader? Somebody who engages in business on their own, by themselves, without doing it through some other mechanism. It's the simple way to do stuff. It could be that, your parents have a corner shop. The corner shop has a name, so it's recognizable, or they've got a kebab shop or something. It doesn't need to be adopting a particular form of business mode to operate. You can just do it yourself. And if the customer doesn't like the product and then wants a refund, then you discuss this directly with them. If the customer uses the product and suffers some sort of damage because the toilet flush doesn't work and kind of floods their bathroom or something, then they might come after you, either in contract because you sold them something that is not that is in violation of the Consumer Rights Act, or in tort if you cause damage to something else, and then you will be personally responsible for what you've done, because if you've given them something that has caused them harm, then that creates a personal responsibility for you. So this is all fine, okay, and it's all normal. And if you find yourselves engaging in any sort of business or commercial activity in those terms, you will be a sole trader. Yorgos and George, the guys with the toilet flush, they're not together in that sense, don't get any ideas, but they came up with the thing together. What does this mean? If they're operating as sole traders, how does the fact that they're a unit represent itself to the outside world? Are they a unit? If somebody has any problem, will they be asking them both? Do they have to split the cost if something goes wrong? Or is one of them responsible to the exclusion of the other? How could you tell? So their business, if you want to call it that, in relation to people externally, requires sort of information. Also themselves. What happens if Yorgos wants to produce the toilet flushes in China, but George wants to produce them in Britain. And they cannot agree with each other about what is the way to do. How are they going to get over that? What if they disagree about how the money that they put into the business is separated? What if they disagree about how do you extract the value of what they're doing and how they share the profits? What if Yorgos says, yes, okay, we worked on setting up the website and you really haven't done anything, and I think my contribution is more valuable than yours, therefore I should get more money out of it. Once you start getting groups of people trying to do something, this creates complexity, both in relation to external people they're dealing with and between themselves. So then you might start thinking about something more legal, something more set to govern their relationship. One, they can still operate as sole traders. They can have an agreement right between them. But once they start formalizing what they do, then we might start thinking of them as a partnership and not as people who are doing things individually. So a partnership is precisely a way to organize the relations of people when there's more than one carrying out a common business. It is to organize the relationships between them and also to tell us something about how the rest of the world should approach them. So when you go through your material, you're going to see quite a lot of discussion of what partnerships are and what how they're supposed to run and what does it mean for people. What it basically means is that the partnership is a unit in the eyes of the rest of the world. So if I'm dealing with a partnership, then I'm dealing with them as a community. I'm not dealing with individual people. So if I order my toilet flushes from this partnership and my toilet flush doesn't work and it floods my house, then I'm going to be suing the partnership. Either of them, whichever has the money, is responsible to compensate me. Out of their own money, yes, but it's either one or the other or both of them. I don't care. So Yorgos cannot say, hang on, we're doing this business together, but it was George that made the specs and the specs were wrong that they sent to the manufacturer and that's why it's leaking. Therefore, it's not my fault, it's his. I don't care. I'm the customer. So for me, they're a unit. If we recognize them as a partnership, and partnership is something that is recognized a matter of law. So you are a partnership as a matter of fact. It's because of how you run your business. You don't need to go and say, I would like to register a partnership, please, and get a sign that says I'm a partnership. The law will recognize you as a partnership if this is a reflection of what you've been doing. It means something for me as a client going after them. They're responsible, either both of them or individually responsible to compensate me for the loss. But the partnership also says something about how they run between themselves. It says that they have equal responsibility for management. They've got equal expectation to share in the profits. One cannot seek to exclude the other out of a partnership. They're co-responsible, but they also benefit in a common way out of what's happening. And all this is expressly stated in the law. So it's not Yorgos telling George, this is what I want to do, so this is how I understand the idea of a partnership. There's a lot of law behind it. There's a statute in the Partnerships Act, and there's also quite a lot of case law that has developed to deal with various instances of problems that have come up. If your business is run as a sole trader, your basic understanding of the world is through the law of contract, contractual relationships or tort that's got specific consequences. If you are a community of people that have been recognized as a partnership, then your relationship with the world is understood both in terms of contract and tort, but also through the law that is specifically about partnerships. And you can either run alone as a sole trader, or you can run together with somebody else as a partnership. Doesn't this cover pretty much all eventualities? So where do the companies come in? Companies come in as they came in at some point as a new idea to take collaborative elements of a partnership a step further. This wasn't necessarily obvious what a company should be like and what are the consequences of having a company. But it developed through legislative activity, yes, but also through case law. One of the things that we're going to come back to quite frequently is the idea of Salomon and Solomon, which is from the end of the 19th century. They legislated the idea of a company. They said groups of people that come together now, instead of doing it as a partnership that was well established, they should have the opportunity to do it through this mechanism that we're going to call a company. And this company is going to be a novel way to run this business because it's going to be an entity with certain distinct characteristics. So we're no longer talking about a community of people coming together to pursue some business activity, but we're going to create this highlight institution through which they're going to run this. Sounded like a great idea, but the actual content of it wasn't very clear till we came to this case. Basically, what happened here is that it went a little bit wrong because the person who set up a company, they thought, okay, we have now a new form of business organization. Why don't we try it out? They set it up. They transferred the business they were running before through this new structure. At some point, the business got into trouble and it went bankrupt. Right? We don't use the word bankruptcy in the UK. We use the word insolvency, but you get what I mean. They've gone insolvent. And when people came to collect their money, the company told them, I'm sorry, I ran out of money, so I cannot repay everybody. And the people who were owed the money, they kind of went, hang on a second. Mr. Solomon here that I've been doing business with all these years, he's still all right. He's sitting in his house. He's got like kind of bags of money under the bed. So I don't see what the problem is. They go to court and they say, hang on a second, this guy, bags of money and all, sets up this business. Subsequently, the business gets into trouble. The business goes bust. Okay, maybe the business doesn't have enough money to pay back everybody. Why don't we take the money from that guy? It's his business. So the court has the opportunity to explore what actually this new form of business organization means. And what they come up with is with two key concepts that have been kind of chasing after us since then. They came up with clarifying, this was present in the law, but they clarified the idea of separate corporate personality, meaning that when you set up a business through a company, not only you've created a structure that is more recognizable, this structure is actually alive in the same way that you created a doll and then it's come alive. The court says the same thing happens with a company, hopefully with less kind of monstrous consequences. So the company is alive. In the eyes of the law, the company is a totally separate person. So we no longer talk about the people who put it together, its initial subscribers or supporters or shareholders or whatever you want to call them. We're talking about something entirely new that is alive on its own. And because it's a new thing and it's alive on its own, if you have trouble with it, then you need to deal with that thing. A separate corporate personality is the key idea. And the second key idea is the idea of limited liability. What does that mean? What is limited? It means that the money of this new creature is its own money. So not only it's got its own separate personality, it's got capacity, it can do stuff in its own name, you can have contracts that are signed by X company. You don't need the name of a person to, of course, a person physically represents them, but the company itself that engages into those contracts. And the money belongs to the company. If the company gets into trouble, you cannot go after the people who support it. You cannot go after its shareholders, that are the people who own the bits of the company. You cannot go after them. You cannot go after the banks that gave them loans. You cannot go after other people who have participated. You cannot go after its employees. You cannot go after its bosses. This sounds wrong, doesn't it? Basic idea. Separate personality, you're dealing with a different creature. Limited liability, the money of the creature is the money of the creature. You cannot go after people who are associated with it, either as shareholders or as bosses or whatever. The people who were suing Solomon there were left unsatisfied. And even though the whole thing looked like a scam, because the guy was still there, his money was intact, but the business had switched over to the company, it looked terrible and it confused the court as well, because the court at first instance wasn't sure that the rules should be interpreted in that way. But it got all the way till the end, and the final decision of the court was that no, we've set up this new structure and this is how it works. And some of the stuff that we explore now throughout the first term is actually whether this is a good idea. Because the idea of creating these separate structures and creating those barriers to liability could be good, could be bad. If a company fails, it's bad most of the time. But the consequence for our friends Yorgos and George are that if they're dealing as sole traders, anything that goes wrong comes back to them. If they're dealing as partners, anything that goes wrong comes back to them. There is no separation between the personal assets, the personal money, and the business activity. It's all one and the same. But if they set up a company, then suddenly they have a set of distinct roles in relation to that company. That company is a different creature. If something goes well and the company becomes wealthy, there are ways in which they can participate in that wealth, and well done to them. But if the company goes wrong, then there's a stopgap. So there's a protection that they cannot come after their personal wealth. And this is attractive. It is attractive because if you want to run a business, maybe you want that assurance, you want that separation between your personal assets and your business assets. It makes people more likely to invest in businesses if they know that what they stand to lose is the value of their investment, but they don't stand to lose their shares. Whether this is better for the people doing deals with them is another issue. However, the emphasis at the time that they put that stuff together was to encourage activity, was to encourage people participating, investing more, and creating some level of insurance against this. Now, all this, I'm not saying that we should kind of swallow this as an excellent idea. All this is debatable. Whether this is a good mechanism and a good system that has got beneficial consequences down the line is debatable. The particular mechanisms of it are subject to debate. The overall structure is also subject to debate. English law is a capitalist law. English law is built in order to facilitate a capitalist system that is market-oriented and is property and contract law based. You need to understand the law within that framework. It could be that you disagree with aspects of it. It could be that you disagree with the entire structure of it. But you need to recognize it for what it is. And with every system which way is organized, there is always the opportunity for some injustice or some things going wrong. And whether you support the system or not depends on your personal values, of your understanding of where the risks are and what are you most trying to protect. We're assuming throughout our classes and throughout our presentations that people are engaging in business and they're engaging with the idea of companies in order to make money. We presuppose a profit motive. This is not necessarily true for everybody because you could have charities, for instance, Yorgos and George that made their water-saving, environmentally friendly, Greta-pleasing toilet flush might have been doing this because they want to save the world or because they want to contribute to environmental sustainability and they don't seek to make a profit out of it. In which case, maybe they want to make it available to the market in a way that gets it widely introduced, but they only selling it at cost price. There's a variety of things that they could do. If we're thinking about non-profit motives, we're going to see other structures, you're going to read about them in your books, that are built for that purpose. Even if you're not trying to make a profit, you still have a group of people coming together to do something. You still have outside clients or people that you're dealing with, so you need to understand your relationship externally, but you also need to understand your relationships internally. The profit motive or not can be determined on the type of corporation that you choose, but not all corporations are profit motive. For example, you have what we call community interest companies. What are those? These are structures that help people organize even though they don't have a profit motive. Why would you have a community interest company? Because you have a block of flats that you're trying to organize. So in a block of flats or in a large estate, there are lots of people. Some people rent, some people have bought the properties, but there are communal places that you need to take care of. How are you going to generate the money to pay for repairs and maintenance in the building? How are you going to deal with all the contractors? A simple way to do it would be to set up one of those companies. It's not out there to sell anything or make money. It's there to organize stuff. So when you hire plumbers, something wrong, or the gardeners, it is that company that contracts with them. These relationships are clear and they've got clear governance structures, so all the people in the estate can participate in an appropriate way in what's going on. It reduces opportunities for arguments and all of that stuff. So it's a great idea. If you got something that has a charitable purpose, that you're meant to help some other people by engaging in something, it could be that you're not setting up a company at all, but you're running a charity. And charities have got, like partnerships, different legislative bases, different case law, different information about how they work and how they engage both within and without. Be aware that these things exist, things that are for non-profit organizational purposes or things that are for charitable purposes, but our emphasis is profit-making activities. So we will not spend a lot of time talking about non-profit objectives. We're talking about profit-making either through sole traders or partnerships or companies. When we get to the companies themselves, you have probably noticed that there are various signifiers. Very often that you will hear that you're dealing with Plumbers Ltd. Or you're dealing with Vodafone PLC. The fact that you've set up a company doesn't mean that they're all the same, but there are different creatures within the label of company. What we're mostly dealing with is a private limited company. What does that mean? It means that it's a company that has got the separate personality, that it benefits from limited liability, but the people involved in it, the owners, are set at the beginning. It's not very easy to sell a bit of this company to somebody else. It's the way that it's been set up at the beginning and is meant to stay there. The majority of companies begin their life as a private limited company. When a company grows and brings in more people and attracts more investment, it could become a public limited company. So it's not obligatory that you start small and then grow up. It could be that you set up at the beginning as public, but usually this is what happens. A public limited company benefits from limited liability. It has separate personality, but it's got a fluctuating number of members. So the people who own it can change on a daily basis. It does not have to be in a stock market, but most of the time, private limited companies are entered into the stock market. The idea behind this is to encourage investment to facilitate people becoming part of corporate structures.